Mark, Alex, and Rachel were seasoned hikers, known among their friends for chasing adventure, no matter the season. When they decided to tackle Frostbite Trail, a 20-mile route deep in the wilderness, they knew the risks. It was December, and winter had wrapped the trail in thick snow and biting cold. Locals often warned hikers about Frostbite Trail's unpredictable blizzards and eerie history. It wasn't just the weather. There were whispers about people who had gone missing over the years. But Mark wasn't one for superstitions. Ghost stories to keep the tourists out, he'd joked as they prepared for the trek. The first day passed without incident. The trio marveled at the crystalline beauty of the snow-covered trees and the haunting silence of the forest. By the second day, the trail grew steeper and the cold seemed to intensify. Around noon, clouds rolled in, dark and heavy. "We should set up camp early," Rachel suggested, her voice tinged with unease, but Mark insisted they push forward. "The map shows a clearing a mile ahead. We'll be fine." An hour later, the storm hit. The wind howled like a living thing, whipping snow into their faces and obliterating the trail. They pressed on, shouting to each other over the storm. But when Alex turned back to check on Mark, he wasn't there. "Mark!" Alex yelled, his voice swallowed by the wind. Panic set in as they retraced their steps, but Mark was nowhere to be found. His footprints disappeared in the swirling snow. Separated from his friends, Mark tried to stay calm. The blizzard was disorienting, but he remembered survival tips. Stay warm. Find shelter. After wandering for what felt like hours, he spotted it. A small cabin, barely visible through the snow. The cabin looked ancient, its wooden beams weathered and cracked, but a soft glow emanated from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. Mark's relief was palpable. He knocked, but no one answered. Desperation drove him inside. The air was warm, the fire blazing in the stone hearth. Yet the room was empty. No furniture, no food, nothing but the fire. On the walls were carvings, spirals, symbols, and words in a language Mark didn't recognize. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. Then he heard it, the crunch of footsteps in the snow circling the cabin. He froze, listening. The steps stopped at the door. Mark approached cautiously. "Alex? Rachel?" Silence. Then the fire flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The temperature dropped instantly, and a suffocating stillness enveloped the cabin. When the door wouldn't budge, Mark's fear turned to panic. He grabbed his flashlight and scanned the room, but the carvings seemed to shift in the beam's light, almost pulsating. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from above, as if something heavy had landed on the roof. "Help!" Mark screamed, banging on the door. The next morning, Alex and Rachel found the cabin while searching with rescue workers. Inside, the fire was burning, but there was no sign of Mark. His gear was neatly placed by the hearth, but the strange carvings on the walls were fresh, too fresh. One of the rescuers, an older man, paled when he saw the symbols. "This isn't the first time this has happened," he murmured. "People who disappear out here, they don't come back." Mark was never found. To this day, locals warn hikers about the trail, urging them to respect its mysteries or risk becoming part of them. Emma loved the winter holidays, the lights, the gatherings, and the comforting chill in the air. That December night had started perfectly. She'd been at her best friend's holiday party in a small, snow-blanketed town upstate. Laughter, warm drinks, and festive music filled the house. But as the clock struck midnight, Emma decided it was time to head home. The snowfall had been light when she left, a picturesque dusting over the quiet streets. Her old sedan hummed along the deserted highway as snowflakes danced in her headlights. But halfway through the drive, the light flurry turned into a full-blown snowstorm. Visibility plummeted, and the once clear road disappeared under a thick blanket of snow. Emma tightened her grip on the wheel, her knuckles white as she leaned forward, trying to make out the faint lines of the road. Her windshield wipers thumped rhythmically, but they struggled to keep up with the relentless onslaught of snow. That's when she saw him. A figure stood at the side of the road, illuminated briefly by her headlights. His arm was raised, waving her down. He wore a long, tattered coat and a hat pulled low over his face. Emma's heart raced. "Do I stop?" she whispered to herself. Every nerve in her body screamed no, but the sight of him, alone in the storm, filled her with guilt. What if he was stranded, freezing? Against her better judgment, Emma pulled over, rolling down her window just enough to speak. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man leaned down, his face shadowed. "Car broke down," he said simply. His voice was low and rough, like gravel. "Need a ride to the gas station." Emma hesitated, but the storm was worsening. She unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," she said, forcing herself to sound calm. The man climbed into the back seat instead of the front, which struck Emma as odd. She adjusted her mirror, catching a glimpse of him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. For the first few minutes, the ride was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the occasional crunch of snow under the tires. Emma tried to make small talk. "Where's your car?" she asked. "Back there," he replied curtly, pointing vaguely behind them. Something about him unsettled her. She couldn't pinpoint it. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact or how his coat seemed too thin for the brutal cold. Emma glanced at her rearview mirror again and froze. The man wasn't there. The back seat was empty. Her heart pounded. She flicked her eyes toward the road, then back to the mirror. This time he was there, staring directly at her. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. "Is everything okay?" she stammered. He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his presence oppressive. Emma's hands gripped the wheel tightly as panic bubbled inside her. I think I missed the turn to the gas station," she said, pulling over onto the shoulder. She turned around to speak to him directly, but the back seat was empty again. Emma sat frozen, her breath fogging up the car windows. She frantically looked around, scanning the snowy landscape. The storm had eased slightly, and the world outside was eerily quiet. Fighting the urge to scream, she floored the gas pedal and didn't stop until she reached her driveway. Shaking, Emma rushed inside, locking the door behind her. The next morning, she told her friends about the strange encounter. One of them, a local, paled at her story. "There's a legend about a hitchhiker on that road," he said. "Years ago, a man broke down during a storm and froze to death trying to find help. People say he still wanders that highway, flagging down drivers. Sometimes he just vanishes. Other times, he trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Emma never drove that road again. Even now, she avoids snowstorms entirely, haunted by the image of her empty back seat and the man who wasn't there until he was. Liam had always found peace in the quiet isolation of winter. A retired teacher with a love for fishing, he spent every December on the frozen lake near his cabin. The air was crisp, the snow pristine, and the rhythmic sound of his auger drilling into the ice always felt therapeutic. But that year was different. The winter was harsher than usual, the ice thicker and the silence heavier. Still, Liam welcomed the solitude as he packed his gear one frigid morning and trudged out to his favorite spot in the center of the lake. The lake was vast and desolate, its surface shimmering under a pale, overcast sky. As he set up his fishing hole, he noticed faint footprints leading from the shore to another hole about 50 feet away. A hooded figure sat hunched over it, motionless. Liam raised a hand in greeting. "Morning," he called, his voice carrying across the icy expanse. The figure didn't respond, their back rigid. Liam shrugged it off. Ice fishermen were a solitary bunch. He'd met plenty who preferred to keep to themselves. Settling into his routine, Liam baited his line and cast it into the frigid water. Hours passed in relative peace, interrupted only by the occasional groan of shifting ice beneath him. But something gnawed at the edges of his awareness, the humming. At first he thought it was the wind, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. A low, haunting melody seemed to rise from the ice itself, faint but persistent. He glanced toward the other fishermen, who hadn't moved. Unease prickled his skin. The hooded figure finally stood, their movements slow and deliberate. They turned to face Liam, revealing a gaunt, pale face. The man's eyes seemed to sink deep into his skull, shadowed and glassy. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper but unnaturally clear. Liam frowned. "What do you mean?" The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured to the lake around them. "It wakes when the ice cracks," he said cryptically. "Leave while you can." Before Liam could ask another question, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps eerily silent. Within seconds, he vanished into the swirling snow, leaving no trace behind. Liam's unease deepened, but he dismissed the warning as the ramblings of a strange old man. He focused on his line, which suddenly tugged hard. Smiling, he began reeling in what felt like a sizable catch. But then the ice groaned, a deep, resonant sound that made his stomach lurch. The crack came next, sharp and sudden, radiating from his hole in jagged lines. Liam froze, his instincts screaming at him to run. He grabbed his gear and bolted for the shore, his boots skidding on the slippery surface. Behind him, the cracks spread rapidly, the ice splintering like a giant spiderweb. He didn't dare look back. Just as he reached solid ground, a thunderous crash echoed across the lake. Turning, he saw a large section of ice collapse into the freezing water. His fishing hole and the area where the hooded man had been were gone, swallowed by the icy depths. Shaken, Liam reported the incident to the local authorities, who dismissed it as a natural occurrence. But when he described the hooded figure, an elderly park ranger pulled him aside. "You're lucky to be alive," the ranger said, his voice low. "That man you saw, people have been seeing him for decades. Every 10 years or so, someone spots him just before the ice gives way. They say he's a warning, or a spirit tied to the lake." Liam couldn't shake the ranger's words, or the haunting melody that still lingered in his mind. He hasn't returned to the lake since, but every winter he wonders who or what saved him that day.